Welcome to our latest YouTube video. I am here in St Neots today. We are doing a few bits. As you can see, the gym is a little bit of a mess. A few things going on. So just a chance to fix a couple of little niggles. Some doors are being replaced. Done a bit of painting, got quite a bit more to do. And then we're going to put this sort of measures in place to be ready for when we come back. Social distancing in a sense. Machines might be spaced a bit better. We've got a few ideas. I'll do a separate video to talk about that. Today though, I would like to talk about basically setting up a gym and what you should be aware of, and if you are considering setting up a gym, what you really need to keep in mind. So we set this place up in December 2017. So I think we're somewhere around the sort of 905 day mark, something like that. So nearly 1,000 days ago. It doesn't sound that long now. Feels like a while though. Anyway, going straight to it. The first thing I would say is if you are considering setting up a gym, put together a proper business plan. So that includes full projections, best case, worst case, every aspect of what you're planning on doing needs to be down on paper and realistic. I would say without this, you are setting yourself up for failure. I would make sure that you include a P&L, make sure you include a cash flow forecast, I'd say for at least 3 years. 2 years, absolutely crucial. I'd say 3 years is probably wise. Moving on from a business plan, planning permission. Whichever site you finally land on, make sure that change of use is an option. So for instance, here in the UK, the use for a gym is leisure use, which is D2. If the building's already got D2 use, then great, you don't need to do anything. That's the best sort of arrangement. If you do need to make a change, or just investigate that. We did ours ourselves. You can hire companies to do it. They are quite expensive. We did our whole change of use ourselves. We had to do a few studies. We had to do studies here to do with noise. We had to do a few sort of basic things, but all the information is out there. You know, if you're willing to look hard enough, everything's out there. So just do your homework, take your time, be meticulous, and you can do all these sorts of things yourself, and save the money for the kit because you'll need it. One thing that we tripped up on, one thing to be mindful of is once you've got your change of use, be careful of who the superior landlord is. There can be problems if the superior landlord hasn't given their consent. So in our case, we got our planning permission. We didn't get our planning permission initially. We were rejected. We then appealed it. Again, don't be afraid of appeals. We represented ourselves, and there was in the end, a unanimous decision at district level to grant us planning permission, which we were very grateful for. Very, very excited at the time, very relieved. However, about 3 months later, once we were already pretty much building, the issue of the superior landlord came up, and we didn't have the superior landlord's consent. So that, it won't go into detail, but that turned out to be a big issue for us. We got there in the end, obviously here we are, but something to be careful of. Next thing on the list is structural changes. So be mindful that gym machines can't go everywhere. So if you have a second story or a gym with a second level, make sure that the area is spec'd for heavy equipment and for the slamming of weight stacks, for instance, for the dropping of weights, things like that. We've got an upstairs here, just up there, that's the mezzanine area. That is not spec'd for weights. That is pretty much our cardio and functional area. which is why we don't have any big machines up there. Another thing to be mindful of is the cost of those structural changes. Is it the landlord making those changes? Is it you making those changes? What is the deal there? Not to say everyone has a landlord you might be buying. Still, structural changes make sense. We looked at a few units where the unit was perfect, but the structural changes would have been too expensive, and the landlord wasn't willing to contribute to those expenses. So something to be careful of. Next thing on my list is lease negotiations. So, and again, unless you're buying, if you're fortunate enough to be buying, that's great. I mean, I wish we were in that position. We'd of course we'd much rather own. That's not the situation though. We did all of our negotiations ourselves. My advice would be negotiate hard. Make sure that you get a decent rent-free period. Make sure that you have a break clause. So most leases in this country are 5, 10, 15, 20-year leases. I think 10 is the most common. Ours is a 10-year with a break. Shorter leases are common, but only in generally smaller units. Maybe areas out of town, it's possible, but I would say majority are going to be longer leases. I would also be careful of one thing that did trip us up at the time was stamp duty. So make sure that you factor that in. You wouldn't, as first time lease negotiators like we didn't factor in stamp duty. It wasn't the end of the world, but it was money that we didn't budget for. So again, just something to be mindful of. That's the aim of the video, is just trying to lay things out so that other people don't trip up. Perhaps you can benefit from a few of the mistakes we made. Thankfully, we didn't make too many mistakes because we planned really meticulously. From when we chose this unit, it was a good 9 months before we opened the gym. So we did take our time, even though at the end it was crazy and it was sleepless nights and all the rest of it. That's inevitable, I think, when you're opening your first gym. But take your time, do the numbers, check them again and again and again. Next thing on my list is the fit out. So for instance, this unit was an empty shell. There was nothing in it at all, had no water, no electric. I did as much as I could myself. Even, I laid all the rubber flooring, for instance. Amber did painting. We did lots of stuff. I mean, we were sat here having takeaways in the evenings because we were generally working late into the night. There were times I got home at gone midnight, sort of times laying the floor at 2 in the morning at sort of -2 degrees in here. It was a bit crazy, but you got to do what you got to do. And I would always say do as much as you can yourself. As I said before, you'll need the money for the kit. Say it again. So with the fit out, again, check your numbers. Don't be lazy. Get 3 quotes for everything. Speak to people. If you know local tradesmen, use them. And when you do your budget, I would say add on 20%. That's conservative. Add on at least 20% because there will be unforeseens. I think maybe even more so when you're taking on a building that's been used before, because you don't know everything about the building. This, at least we knew there was nothing there, so there was nothing too much to go wrong. Things did go wrong, but not to the extent that they could if someone else had been using this unit before. It was an empty unit, and it had been empty for about 4 years when we took it over. So that has its pros and its cons. The next thing, or the last thing on my list, is kit. So when you're choosing kit, think about which brand you want to go with. Think about, you don't necessarily have to go with one brand, but you'll have a main brand for whatever you're doing. I mean, we're a predominantly strength and bodybuilding facility. Other gyms might be into other things, strongman, CrossFit. There's all sorts of different things that you might be doing with your gym, in which case your machine requirements would be different. However, I would still think carefully about who your main supplier is going to be. Think about, of course, price is important. Think about quality. Think about after-sales service. What happens when a machine breaks? How long do they take to respond? What sort of warranties are on offer? How long do spare parts take? If it's a non-UK manufacturer, do spare parts take weeks and months on end? In which case, that's a serious consideration. What else? Of course, a big factor here is, do you lease or do you buy? With us, we did a bit of a mix. So we leased the equipment upstairs. We bought most of the equipment downstairs. If I could do it again and I had the money, I would probably buy as much as possible. Would always be my advice. But of course, the advantage of leasing is that you can offset everything that you lease, your entire lease expenses on a monthly basis are offsettable as an expense against tax. That is a benefit. A negative of leasing is that, of course, there's a cost attached to leasing. So there's effectively you're being extended finance. That could be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And there's a cost attached to that. So obviously buying it outright means you're avoiding that sort of interest charge. And you're keeping your overheads low, which I'm always in favor of. Like now, for instance, during these times, gyms that have lower overheads are going to fare better than gyms that have higher overheads. We're in a bit of a mixed position here, but always, if I could, I would choose to buy rather than lease. That's a personal preference. I have my reasons, which I've sort of mapped out in brief there, but there's a lot more to it. Look into that though, certainly. That's pretty much it on equipment, and that's pretty much it on the video. If there's anything that anybody wants to know more specifically, I would say please just add that in the comments and I'll get back to you. If it's something significant, maybe we'll do another video on it. Anyway, I hope this has helped today, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video.